A commander was roused from their research by a scout, as another invading detachment had been spotted making landfall on the shore. The mage sighs and adjusts their hat before picking up a thick tome and walking with the soldier under their leadership. After being escorted to the hill overlooking the beach, they notice a group made to look like brigands had landed on the island. But this tactician saw them for what they were, an advance party for the city of Mach. They chuckled at this poor excuse for disguises and ordered the scout to relay very clear instructions to the rest of their troops and to only move once the signal has been given. The soldier salutes and runs off to do as they're told, only for the mage to open their book and ask a question to the air. As Aether began to gather around them, a giggle in the wind was their answer, making the mage smile. The Machi invaders began to advance on the island of Vilbrind, only for a small bead of light to dart between the nearby foliage. Out of the plants flew a fairy, catching the attention of the Machi invaders. She snickers and blows a kiss toward the sky, sending a shower of light over the area. One of the mages in their party realized what this meant all too late, as Nimian warriors were now converging on them from all sides. One of the mages in their party realized what this meant all too late, as Nimian marines were now converging on them from all sides. They tried to fight back, but their attacks and spells were being deflected by a shimmering barrier around the soldiers of Nim. At the top of a nearby hill overlooking the battle stood their commander. They smiled as they watched their soldiers surround the enemy, empowered by their magics. They closed their book confidently and remarked how disappointed they were. They had already planned 3 stages ahead, and yet here the enemy was, falling apart at the first. Foresight in the heat of battle can be challenging. It's easy to get caught up in the moment in the thick of a fight, and lose sight of potential win conditions. But there was one group of specialists born from the civilization of Nim that were experts in proactive planning. They turned a mundane navy into tireless champions and were so clever on the fields of battle that no other country in the 5th Astral Age could overpower Nim through military might. Today, we will discuss what it means to be a scholar. The profession we know as scholar didn't appear until later in the 5th Astral Era. The Black Mages of Mach had already become a force to be reckoned with, and the White Mages of Amdapor had grown just as strong to match them. At the time, the civilization of Nim was mostly a passive city-state, with the gross majority of their population being plainsfolk Lalafell. They were content to take advantage of oceanic trade and make liberal use of their strong naval presence to keep their country stable. But with how magic-focused the other city-states in this era had gotten, their mundane navy was steadily looking weaker and vulnerable. At the time, Nim wasn't a land that had vast libraries and schools dedicated to magical research. They only had a handful of mages to contend against the powerful magi that were starting to appear on the Eorzean mainland. Being primarily located on the northern half of the island of Vilbrind gave them a strategic advantage for generations, but now they were no match for the growing magical presence in the world. The heads of the Nimian navy knew it was only a matter of time until the ruthless expansion of Mach would try to claim their lands and resources for their skirmishes against Amdapor. They understood they needed a magical detachment to counter Mach's black mages, but they didn't have any archmages capable of doing so. In a desperate attempt to secure the future of their city-state, they relegated the handful of mages within the navy into a special support detachment. If they couldn't overpower black magic, they would try to outsmart it. The mages in this special service were given ranks of authority and were there to provide tactical for all standing units. Thinking like a mage, they provided their marines the best positions and maneuvers to counter black magic. And the results were already noticeable, with minor engagements ending in a total victory for Nim every time. This new mage position started to get more resources and funding with its continued success. casters started to hone their craft, and what was originally just reactive curing spells developed into proactive shields. This preventative measure was something that turned magicless fighters into unstoppable juggernauts, and the mages were only getting stronger. With their new shields and proactive spells, these mages were no longer just advisors, and instead were given ranks of captain, commander, and even admiral within the Nemean navy. No longer did they simply give tactical advice from a hidden tent, they commanded their soldiers and marines on the front lines, protecting and healing them during engagements whilst observing the flow of battle and giving them orders that their enemies couldn't outmaneuver. But there was a growing problem. It was getting difficult to command multiple groups of marines and focus on weaving spells at the same time. Trying to solve this problem, one of these mages focused all of their power onto their soul crystal, making it resonate with them in a unique way until something living was born from it. This accumulated aether took the form of the first fairy. By creating and harmonizing with these new aether-based entities, the mages were able to focus more on their tactics and shields, leaving basic curing magic to their new partners. This division of labor made them into shockingly formidable forces. With their studies into magic and war reaching its apex, these mages gained the title of Scholar, and were among the most respected members of Nemean society. The Scholars of Nim had become so lethal that even serious invasions from the city-state of Mach, whilst they were at their peak, were all pushed back over and over again, with the Black Mages never finding a way to get any ground on the island of Vilbrind. Their shields were too strong, and their tactics were too sound to be overwhelmed by might or magic, which is why Mach resorted to the most depraved and cowardly of tactics to try and bring Nim to its knees. Taking advantage of their generous nature, Mach had sent a spy to Nim's borders with an item that would spread an aether-based disease through the city-state, turning a chunk of their population into what we call Tonberries. Many scholars tried to stop the spread of the plague, and many more were caught by this disease and began to atrophy. Once turned into a Tonberry, their aether had become too disturbed to cast their spells or summon their fairies, leaving many to think their proud profession would end in the floods of the Sixth Umbral Calamity. As we all know, this is not the case. Whilst it was more than 1,000 years before a true scholar would arise, their art is making a comeback. The Tonberries that had lost their minds to the plague had started to think rationally again thanks to the help of adventurers. The unique nature of their disease halted their aging and allowed them to live for hundreds of years. And just to spite the now dead civilization of Mach, the surviving scholars of Nim are happily teaching their craft to exceptional arcanists from Limsa Lominsa. So let's go over their powers and relationship with their fairy to get a better understanding of what made them so unique in the Fifth Astral Era. Like a summoner, the symbols and words on a scholar's tome is what helps to channel and convert ambient aether into potent spells. But their magic was unique. Like stated earlier, the scholars of Nim took a proactive approach to healing arts, making it so that dangerous attacks wouldn't be nearly as harmful, or at all in some cases. This specialization in shields and barriers makes anyone or anything who relies purely on brute force to be at a distinct disadvantage against a scholar. Not only that, but with the tactics of ancient scholars to learn from within their soul stones, they're able to unleash spells and provide strategies that makes their allies more powerful than they would ever be on their own. This pinpoint method of spellcasting was extremely aether efficient, making for the summoning of their fairies that much easier. The scholar's fairy takes some of the heat off of the caster. With their fairies focusing on minor curative spells, the scholars can focus on making robust shields and exposing weaknesses. That being said, the fairies are extremely unique even in the world of aetherology. It's theorized that the fairies themselves are the will of their soul crystal given form. At first, they were a simple ethereal construct, not thinking beyond the tasks given to them. But as time moved on, and their soulstone moved from scholar to scholar, the fairies gained a sort of personality. We're able to see fairies think completely independently from their caster, and even interact with their scholars on a personal level like a completely autonomous person. This remarkable level of higher intellect has never been seen in any other ethereal summon. Whilst they don't have the power to vocalize their desires through words, many scholars seem to be able to read the body language and facial expressions of their fairy like a book, and are known to hold conversations with them. To some scholars, their fairies became their closest friends and were even seen as family. If a fairy is ever trying to give you special attention, don't ignore it. It may be trying to tell you something important. Lastly, let's discuss their choice of weapon and attire. For any of you that listened in on my Summoner lecture, you'd understand that these books are so much more than tomes with random symbols and gibberish. Their rich and long history goes all the way back to carving runes on the ground and walls to form the first spells. Eventually, this evolved into arcane tattoos, which grew into runes being woven into a mage's clothes. But eventually, the potential hundreds of pages in a book began to serve mages far better than any prior method. Much of what Allagan's summoners perfected when it came to arcane grimoires was lost in the Fourth Astral Era. With some of these methods being rediscovered in the Fifth Astral Age, Nim adopted and converted what was found into both tactical guides and symbols of arcane power. Many scholar books possess both lessons in the art of war, as well as the incantations and signs needed to execute the spells these teachings reference, with some of the pages inside the greatest tomes revealing extremely powerful magics. Next up is their attire. With scholars being a marriage of arcane study and military development, their clothes reflected both. You'll notice many scholar outfits are typically decorated with badges and adornments that reflects their higher ranking within the Navy. But what you'll also notice is that as they became more active on the front lines, their boots and other pieces of gear became more military. However, scholars never completely lost their academic appearance no matter how involved they became with their Marines. This was because their outfit was not only a symbol of their station, but one of dedication as well. One of the most striking features on a scholar are the motorboards they wear on their heads. Normally, this was a formal attire worn only during academic graduations, but scholars started to wear them as a symbol of their never-ending pursuit of higher learning. It's true they were tactical geniuses on the front lines, but they also strived to use their knowledge to improve their society as well when they were off the battlefield. They were so proud of their pursuit for knowledge that most scholars that were turned into Tonberries never stopped wearing their hats. As a side note, a good chunk of scholars did in fact wear glasses. Constantly studying combat maps and reading arcane tomes did strain their eyes and make many scholars become nearsighted because of it. And that is the complete history of scholars from their history, powers, and choice of wardrobe. Unlike black mages and white mages, we're able to speak with the original practitioners of this craft. One day, the ruins of Nim may once again become a focal point for research and study for those looking to improve as a mage and a tactician. Listen closely, scholars. If you heed the advice of your fairy whilst thinking ahead of both your opponents and teammates, you'll find that your magic is a force that can turn the worst odds into a flawless victory. Good day! Thank you for staying to the end of my lesson. It's my hope that you found something new and interesting in between my ramblings. If you did, consider subscribing and liking this video. Doing that is the easiest way to tell me I'm doing a good job at feeding your thirst for knowledge. If there is a topic you'd love to learn more about that I've yet to cover, let me know in the comments and I'll see where my research takes me. I'd also encourage you to share what you learned here with your friends and adventuring companions, and if they're interested, bring them to the next assembly. I hope to see you and any other curious travelers in the next lecture. Till then, stay safe, my friends.